Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Don sitting in the host chair today as we start episode number 101. That's right. A Fork in Time has made it into its second century of episodes. We're excited about the 100 that we've already come through and certainly excited about what lays ahead. In fact, today's episode is going to be one of two episodes that we release this week, most likely. This one is actually going to be more of an update and housekeeping as well as forward-looking type of episode. And then one of the things that Alexis and I have talked about is recording a subsequent episode for this week that'll be more of a retrospective. We didn't do that on the 100th episode, but we do want to take the passage of the 100th episode as being a time that we can talk a little bit about our learnings and the things that we've discovered as we've gone through this process, and hopefully many of you have been on that process with us. Today's episode is going to be a little bit abbreviated, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off now to the break and hope that you join us afterwards, where I'll be bringing you some updates and giving you some details, more of the detail type of things, so sort of a teaser episode about what is coming in the subsequent next couple of dozen episodes, as well as some other exciting things that are happening. So stick with us, and we hope to see you after the break. Thanks.
Would groceries delivered to you in as fast as 1 hour save you a trip to the store? Instacart makes that possible thanks to personal shoppers in your area who hand-select items based on your preferences from the stores you love. And shopping multiple stores is possible on a single order. Instacart picks the freshest produce and even keeps your eggs safe, all while finding everything you usually buy, providing smart suggestions for new items, and even highlighting deals to help you save money. And now you get free delivery on your first order over $35. Let Instacart know we sent you and help support our show by following the link in the show notes. Instacart. Groceries delivered in as fast as 1 hour.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Again, Don sitting in the host chair today. This episode that's going to be something of a summary in some ways of some things that have been going on, but also a near-term look ahead to some things about A Fork in Time. First of all, you may have noticed with this particular update, perhaps you've seen it if you've downloaded others, but we have just recently updated, it's a small tweak, but we've updated the logo for Fork in Time. So one of the things, if you like the new logo, it's not much of a change, but I think it is an improvement. But just pointing that out, if it's something that you like, let us know that you like it. In fact, we're going to be asking a lot of, hey, if you like it, let us know kind of questions. In fact, in the show notes, there will actually be a link to a survey, which is a quick sort of the 101, an overview, a survey about some of the things that we want to get some feedback on. So the first one is, do you like the look and feel of the slightly tweaked but slightly redesigned logo? And if so, what do you like about it? Or if you don't like it, what do you not like about it? The other thing that I just want to throw out there that'll also be part of the survey is we did have feedback, and we're constantly asking for it, so we really do want it. And we don't expect all of that to be positive feedback, but we got some feedback from a listener that said that they generally liked the content of the show, but they were actually annoyed by one particular thing. And so I'm going to ask you as our listening audience to sort of weigh in on whether you feel the same about this or feel differently, because I really would like to know the opinion of more than one on this subject, and depending upon your response, we'll see if we make any changes to it. Many of you recognize the theme from the show. That actually comes from a piece of free, essentially open license music, that we provide the link to it there in the show notes because we're required to. The tune is actually called Conquer, and Shane Ivers is actually the composer of that. So I really enjoyed it when I was looking for an easy way to have music on the show and obviously not run into any copyright infringement issues. So I really enjoy the Conquer theme. But you'll notice that we actually don't start the very beginning of the episode with the Conquer theme. There's an automated voice that welcomes you to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. And this particular listener in their feedback provided their feedback saying that they did not like the automated voice. In fact, they were very clear in describing how much that it annoyed them and suggested that we needed to get rid of it. So I'm going to throw that out there as just something that we would like some specific feedback on. Do you like that there? Do you not like that there? Do you not care? Have you even noticed? But I'd certainly like to know more than an opinion of one. Know what my opinion is, know what Alexis's opinion is, and perhaps the opinions of others. But really interested to know what the opinion is of listeners that are out there. I'm not trying to persuade you to think any differently on it, but I should also let you know that part of that was out of ease, not having to find a separate voice other than my own at the start of the podcast to record that little snippet. But what other folks may not realize, it's something of an homage to one of the podcasts that I used to listen to way back in the early days when I first started listening to podcasting. And they actually had in their opening process, their intro to the show, they actually used an automated voice. And so that's part of where I picked up the concept of doing that. And it's one of the reasons that I included it. It's a little bit of an homage to that particular podcast, which was a very specialized podcast. So I'm not going to go into what that's about, but that's part of the reason that it exists. So just having said that, either way, when you go, again, there's a link in the show notes, and also on the website, there'll be a link to the survey. The 101 survey is what we'll call it, where you can give feedback on whether you like the automated voice in the opening theme, the opening piece to the show, and as well as providing feedback on the actual theme song that we use, Conquer. Again, we're going to ask sort of for feedback on all things that may seem trivial, but are sort of important in the overall situation as well. One of the other things I definitely wanted to do also here in sort of this sort of look ahead is I've been teasing this a little bit on the last few episodes, but wanted to go a little bit deeper on this to give you an idea about some of the things that are coming. And some of this is actually drawn from, we did a survey, which is still open, by the way. If you want to go in, again, on the website, you can click and do the big themes survey. But asked our listeners how they felt about the concept of big themes in history versus smaller themes in history. And we came up with a group of responses from that and sort of some overall themes that we definitely want to pick up. One of the things that occurred more frequently than you might imagine is a desire to look specifically at things that are in the area of innovation in sort of the commercial or the industrial sector. And so one of the things we're definitely going to have that's in the first 20 episodes of the second 100 is a little bit of a focus on some inventions and their impact. I think we've already done at least one episode, for example, on the printing press, but there's a number of other inventions that have a tremendous impact on history, and some of them are a little bit more obscure. And so we'll actually be looking at that because that was one of the themes that was exposed in the Big Themes survey, and we certainly want to come back to that. Another one is actually going back and looking at other parts of the world. We've talked about this also a number of times as we've teased that on the last few episodes, but looking and spending more time particularly with Chinese history and the history of Asia, in the sense that that's probably the most underrepresented geographic aspect of what we've talked about when it comes to the podcast. And so we're going to make an intentional effort to be looking for ways to highlight and focus on what-if scenarios that happen primarily in Asian history, so Chinese history, Indian history, Japanese history, the types of things that really cover that continent and give the Far East a little bit more of a flavor and a feel here on the podcast. Continuing in that theme of other geographies to explore, another area that we want to spend more time would be on South America and Africa. Not quite as much of a demand from the Big Theme survey, but we know that those are sort of underserved geographic areas that have a rich and diverse history that we want to go back to and look at some of the things that are there. The tendency, of course, is to talk about things that have big world impact. A lot of times it's around wars. We've certainly spent a lot of time around World War I, World War II, and the events there for obvious reasons. Those are big historical events that have large sweeping scopes. We spent some time talking about conflicts in Europe. We've spent a good bit of time talking about conflicts, particularly as they relate to England and her enemies and her allies on the continent moving forward, particularly because of Alexis's love of English history. And we're going to continue to do that. We're not going to abandon those things because we know that those have broad appeal. But reaching out and intentionally focusing a little bit more on Africa and South America are things that we want to do. And so you'll be seeing more of that coming forward over time. Sort of the last big scope type of thing that came out of that Big Theme survey was talking a little bit more about broader religious themes throughout history. Of course, anytime we're talking about European history and many things that we've talked about, English history, we tend to be talking around things that are related to the Protestant Reformation, to around Christianity. We've had a couple of instances where we've talked a little bit more about Islam and some of the things that relate to that, but making an intentional effort to go a little bit broader on our scope with some of the what ifs as they touch religion. And so that'll be another big theme that you'll see and notice, particularly as we go through the next 20 to 30 episodes. You'll see these things all mixed in and a little bit of flavor of that. So I encourage you to be part of that. We've also talked about bringing in more guest hosts. I've teased a little bit of that in the process of working through some of those episodes now. They take a little bit longer to coordinate because you have to make arrangements to get the other party on the line and find the time for that, and then the editing aspects of that. But again, much more of something that we intend to do from a diversity standpoint moving forward. We're excited about actually the fact the number of guest hosts that we've already had during the first 100 episodes. That's actually something I'm proud of, and finding a recurring contributor who's very excited to be part of the podcast, and we're very excited to have him in Chris Coppola, but others that you've seen multiple times. Mentioned Brent Frost a number of times and others that are there. We're going to have more of those folks back on a regular, frequent basis, in addition to some of the new folks that we're going to be bringing into the mix there. In fact, our sort of goal is to have very few solo episodes like this one. Maybe one episode out of 10 on average would actually be a solo episode, with a lot more focus on shared episodes, either with Alexis and I, with Alexis and someone else, or with any of the other contributors and guests that we'll have. So that's going to be more of a theme that's going to continue as we move into the second batch of 100 episodes, and you'll see that more prevalent because we've grown to that point as a podcast, and we're looking forward to that. One of the things that we don't do a lot of, I'm going to take actually a little bit of an extended moment to do it here, is we talk a lot about going to the website for the podcast and giving us feedback there and visiting some of the aspects are there. And we're going to continue to do that. That's www.aforkintimepodcast.com. And we encourage you to go there and do that. But one of the things that we don't spend a lot of time doing is actually focusing on or talking a lot. We mention it frequently, but don't sort of quote unquote harp on it, is becoming a patron of the podcast through our Patreon page. And one of the things I would just like to encourage you to do, this is not a money-making endeavor, but it does have costs in terms of the actual hard costs as well as the cost of time. And so if you do appreciate the podcast and you're able to do so, really would encourage you to at least consider providing some financial support to us. That could be a small amount. Any amount basically is acceptable. You'll see that when you go to our homepage and then connect over to the Patreon link, or go directly to patreon.com/aforkintime, where you can become a patron of the show. And we do provide some additional benefits for that. Having said that, one of the things that I think I need to be apologetic for, and they say confession is good for the soul, is the realization that when we first started the podcast, we had a high intent to do what many podcasts and other types of media do, which is to provide extra value to our patrons on Patreon by providing access to exclusive content and other things like that. We have done that in the past, and we, for example, do offer early access to episodes there when we have some that are earlier in the queue, and we're going to get better at doing that. That's, again, going to be one of the benefits of being a patron, is the ability to hear episodes before their actual release dates. But one of the things we're going to intentionally do that we're going to be launching off here in the next couple of weeks is actually a series that is going to remain, for the most part, an exclusive only to our Patreon subscribers. One of the big themes in history that I've come to be more aware of, in fact, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I wasn't overly aware of it, is something that's known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. So for those of you that are listeners, and many of you I know are very avid students of history, you're saying to yourself, how in the world could Don not have known a lot about the Late Bronze Age collapse? And the realization of that is that I knew about some of the elements of that, some of the individual empires and individual parts of that event, which happens roughly around 1200 BC, but hadn't really understood as well as I do now, and have come to understand the linkage for this particular set of events that all happened in the span of about 100 to 150 years. So we're talking about the period roughly from about 1250 BC to 1100 BC. There's debate even among historians about what the actual period is. That should be covered in and be called the Late Bronze Age collapse, depending on how broad or how narrow you want it to be. But it's a fascinating point in history for a number of different reasons. And then we want to focus on it, but we've chosen to do that actually for our patrons. because we think that it's going to be a longer, extended type of series, could almost justify being its own podcast. So we're going to carry it over to the Patreon, patron-only environment as something that we're going to reserve for folks that are there. So just to give you a quick background on that, of course, it also ticks some of the other boxes about some of the diversity that we wanted to bring and will continue to bring to the podcast. It goes back further in time. We're talking about a period that here is before much of what we've covered on the podcast, going again back to about 1350 to roughly maybe 1100 BC, depending 1250 to 1100 BC, depending on where you want to define that in. But it's also really big in terms of the broad scope of history. We've already sketched out, we being Alexis, Chris, and I, and others that we may have. In fact, we hope to bring others in to join us for those episodes. About 8 to 10 different themes to carry through that are big themes. Some of them are very relevant to that time frame and the couple of hundred years that come after, which are very critical and important. But some of them actually have the types of legs that carry them all the way down to modern history when you think them through. And so we're excited about that focus on the what ifs of if there had not been, or a different way that the late Bronze Age collapse would have carried out. So if that sounds like a topic that's interesting to you, I would welcome you considering becoming a patron, if for no other reason, just for that, because that's going to be something that probably at least once every 2 weeks we release an episode. It may be as frequently through parts of our run through that as once a week, but definitely over the next 2 to 3 months, that's going to be some extra content that is going to be exclusive via the Patreon links that are there for our patrons. And so if that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to go do that. It's very likely that the introductory episode to that, which sort of sets the stage for that, may be something that appears both in Patreon and appears on our normal feed. But definitely the content episodes are going to be something that's reserved and exclusive for our patrons on Patreon. A couple of other just quick things to mention. I would really, really, really strongly encourage you, if you're willing to also take advantage of our various social media connections to provide some publicity and some exposure for the show through social media. We have our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/aforkintime. And there you'll also find the link to our Facebook group, which has been growing a little bit. Something that we want to grow a lot more as a private place where there's more of an opportunity for our listeners to gather and to discuss episodes and provide feedback that's outside of just our normal web page, but over in the social media world as well. Of course, we're on Twitter at FIT Podcast, Instagram. All those links can be found on our website there on the first page at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. And so we'd encourage you to be an active sharer of who we are and what we're about on social media. So even if you can't contribute financially, if you're willing to contribute with some time and effort there, that will help. And certainly it also helps to distribute and update the podcast by word of mouth. That's something that we appreciate as well. Another thing that I know is coming up in the very near term, because we've already been trying to coordinate on it. You may recall that we're connecting to other alternate history podcasts. In particular, we've already done that once with the What If podcast, Brody Burton's podcast. Brody and I have been in conversations to figure out when we're able to do a joint recording again, so I'm looking forward to that. And for those of you that listened to episode number 100, you know that we had a shout out or mention there in the show for him as well. I encourage you to support that young man, a very bright young man. I'm impressed by him. Support his efforts on the What If podcast if you can and if you will. So that's another part of what we're going to be doing here over, again, the next 100 episodes, just calling that the big picture, is interacting more with other podcasts that are in a similar genre and similar area to where we are. The final thing that I want to mention here is actually also a call for somebody who may want to get in very early on a new podcast endeavor. That new podcast endeavor is something that I've been thinking about. You'll see an announcement on the A Fork in Time page. And what I'm looking for there are folks who want to, from day one, essentially from the inception of a new podcast, want to be part of building that. It's going to be around history, but it's not going to be exclusively around alternate history. In fact, it's going to be more of a straight history podcast. And the thinking on that podcast is that it will be more of a long-form podcast. So it will release less frequently, probably initially on a monthly basis. We may get that to where it's issuing on a semi-monthly or a bi-weekly basis, but certainly not in a weekly format, because it's going to have a longer per episode duration. in the way that it's envisioned, and it's going to be straight history. I have a unique little twist for what the podcast is called. I've already got the name picked out and how it will approach things, but if you are interested, not necessarily in being a guest or a contributor or someone who would appear here on A Fork in Time, but would like to just appear more in terms of a regular history discussion, that podcast, which we're looking at getting launched here in the next month or so, is a place for you. So if you're interested in that, again, go to www.aforkintimepodcast.com. There you'll find a link to Interested in the Other podcast and a chance to provide your name and contact information. I'll be in touch, and we can figure out whether it's a good fit for you and a good fit for us. And again, I'm looking for folks who will be part of that podcast from day one. I certainly expect to appear on that podcast as one of the podcasters who's participating in that, but I don't want every episode of that to be me. I really want to be more in a production facilitating role for that podcast while also getting to enjoy participation from time to time. So again, if you're interested in that, links in the show notes and also links there on the website that'll let you get to where you need to get to. So I think that sort of concludes this little quick hit. Not as quick as I thought it was going to be. We're going to be about 20 minutes, but this is something sort of a state of the podcast, if you will, in terms of just the broad sense that I'm bringing that. And I invite you to tune in for our next episode, which will include Alexis in addition to me. We are sort of giving a retrospective back on the first 100 episodes, and we'll make that sort of a bonus special episode inside of the normal flow of things. Again, starting also, again, in the coming weeks, some of those other exciting episodes that I've talked about as well. So once again, more than anything else, I just realized I forgot to mention the one other thing that's sort of cool and neat. Particularly with the update to the new logo, we're going to be updating our TeePublic site. And TeePublic is the resource that we use that allows you, if you're interested in getting show merchandise, to be able to do that. So there's a link also, again, I think this is now the 6th mention of A Fork in Time, the Alternate History podcast. But from there, you can click on the link that takes you over to getting A Fork in Time gear. And one of the things that has happened now is we've updated the new logo to that site. So if you're interested in a coffee mug or a t-shirt or whatever it might be, there's the new logo that will let you be part of that. So just I almost forgot to mention that, but that's another thing that you can do. We would certainly encourage that. We don't make anything really off of that. Pretty much just covers the cost, including shipping, if you buy any of the items there. But there's a lot of choices, and you can sort of customize the item that you want. So once again, the thing that we want to say most is thank you. We say that, I think, on every episode, and we should. I'm from the South, and I was raised to do that. It's the right thing to do. But we would not be where we are today if it weren't for our listeners and finding a community and continuing to try to grow that community. And so we thank you for the fact that you invest some of your time and some of your attention, which is why we ask for your feedback and your help and your support as we continue this endeavor forward. And as we do that, I'm going to conclude here with the way that we conclude almost every episode, when we remember to do so, which is our suggestion from the folks here at A Fork in Time, is if you happen upon A Fork in Time, we suggest that you take it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the Alternate History podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.